not necessarily tribal or regional.
All right, thank you for staying. You're watching Daybreak, reaching you live from the nation's capital. Time now for us to take a look at the dailies on Daybreak, giving us a sense of what's happening as far as the front pages of our newspapers are concerned. And we'll begin with the Daily Trust newspaper. It says, the lead story says, brain drain, Nigeria's doctor-patient ratio now 1,000 to 5,000. The writer says less than 30,000 practicing, according to the Nigerian Medical Association. And then you have more planning to leave as manpower shortage bites harder. Minister advocates instant replacement for departing doctors. And also you'd have the infograph there basically showing you the doctor-to-patient ratio in Nigeria. There you have it. And then, of course, it says current number of medical doctors in Nigeria, 30,000. Registered doctors since 1960, we have a total of 80,000 in the country, and then an average of between 200 to 300 of my colleagues leave the country every 2 months, says Dr. Ishaya. Now, above that, you'd see 63 days after Kaduna DPO kidnapped on duty, still in captivity. That's on page 5. You also find aviation crisis unresolved despite $256 million released to foreign airlines. That's on page 25. E-Naira won't take over financial services of commercial banks. CBN director on page 26. Beside the infograph, why Kwankwaso Obi Alliance collapsed. Professor Alakali on page 32. Touch Bank gets approval to start 100 billion naira sukuk bond, and that's on page 25. Bandits abduct 8 farmers in FCT community. These are the stories on the front page of the Daily Trust newspaper.
Moving on now to the Nation newspaper, where the big story says, Obasanjo, I have no preferred candidate but national agenda. Ex-president visits Babangida Abdulsalami Ogwani. And then, of course, by the rights, just below the headline is a pictorial showing the visit by former President Obasanjo to the former head of state, General Abdulsalami Abubakar, in Mina at the weekend. Just below that, ASU to review 6-month-old strike. Why government can't ban union, says Palana. And then just at the strip just down, Lagos airport cleaner in NDLEA's nets for leading drug syndicate. And on top of the page, federal government to block illegal diversions on Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. Story on page 27. And beside that, Wike gets Rivers PDP backing on call for IU's removal. It's a story on page 4. Beside that, Lagos NURTW leader killed in cult clash. Story on page 6. And then Ondo teachers don't enroll your kids in private school. Ondo to teachers don't enroll your kids in private schools. And below the masthead, kidnapped police officers freed. Gunmen kill hotelier, 3 others. A story on page 6. And lastly, how Nigeria can benefit from stable oil market, which is a story starting from the front page with the Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Mr. Timi Praise Silva, illustrating it. So these are stories on the front page of today's The Nation newspaper.
All right, next, let's take a look at the Blueprint newspaper. There you have quite interesting stories. The lead story is a political story. It says, PDP crisis, Wike lists fresh conditions for Atiku reconciliation. It has the writers that says, PDP flag bearer working with my enemies. Ex-VP can't push out Secondus, others, party source. And then you also have For fear of unknown, IU keeps NEC meeting in abeyance. That's a NWC member. Shekarau dumps Kwankwaso, returns to PDP today. You have just below the masthead, 2023, I have national agenda, not preferred candidate, says former President Olusegun Obasanjo. And then non-payment, underpayment of bill threatening operations, Kaduna Electric. NIPR, Malagi assures Kaduna chapter of continued mentorship. You also find surveillance contract. Ex-militants threaten shutdown of oil production in Akwa Ibom. And then you also have, at the very bottom, investment banks ranks Dangote, Bua, Africa's biggest cement makers. Blockage of grains shipments on Black Sea, reason for food price hike, says the Central Bank of Nigeria. Buni approves employment of 134 nurses, places 167 students on allowance. Gunmen kill hotel owner, 2 others in Ebonyi community. Flood renders hundreds of homeless in Jigawa, cuts off 2 bridges. These are the stories on the Blueprint newspaper this morning.
Moving on to the Punch newspaper, from the top banner, we have a story saying FG rakes in 1.09 trillion from indirect taxes. This is story on page 27. Unpaid salaries, Plateau, Benue, Ondo workers, others grown. A story on page 2. And contributory pension assets hits 14.36 trillion. Next to it, ASU strike enters 196th day. Union decides today. Beside the masthead, aviation sector's GDP crashes by 61% amid crisis. It's a story with detail on page 26. And then the main story, the lead story on this morning's Punch newspaper is also politics. PDP NWC divided over IU chairman's fate uncertain. It has riders. One says, I have no problem being loyal to Wiki Makinde. Deputy chairman, I have no problem being loyal to Wiki and Makinde, according to deputy national chairman of the party, Arapaja. Then party in dilemma over successor if IU resigns. Spokesman says NWC not divided. Atiku, others receive Shekarau back to PDP. Obasanjo touts national agenda. Below that, we have a pictorial and story saying Libyan factional government clash, 32 killed, 159 injured. And at the very bottom of the page, Lassa fever cases now 894, Ondo Edo lead. Beside that, 30,000 died of air pollution in Lagos, according to LASEPA. Accident kills 3 commuters decry. Let me take that again. Accident kills 3 commuters decry Lagos Ibadan highway gridlock. Story on page 4 and 5 of today's The Punch newspaper. So this and many other stories can be found in today's edition of The Punch newspaper.
All right, and then on the News Direct newspaper, you have the lead story talking about the 5.8 billion naira electricity debt. Stakeholders kick over sustenance of electricity supply to Togo, Niger, and Benin. You also find other stories there above the masthead. 14.6 billion naira national carrier operation not feasible, says stakeholders. Oil theft figures outrageous, unrealistic, Chief of Naval Staff. Industry still conglomerate to invest $500 million in Ogun. You also will see other stories below the pictorial. Pantami excited with unprecedented 18.44%, highest ever ICT contribution to Nigeria's GDP. Glow clocks 19, reaffirms excellent service delivery. Back to school, EcoBank Nigeria unveils special scheme on loans remittances. Honorable Abiante commissions constituency project at Ngo. So these are the stories on the News Direct newspaper.
Let's now take a quick look at the Guardian newspaper, where the Business Day newspaper this morning, where the top story is saying, where the top story of the Business Day says Nigeria defies global headwinds with faster economic growth, GDP growth presently surprising, Rwane's FDC says. Then by the right side, Lafarge, MB, Stambik lead in women's representation on boards. And below that, commercial paper issuance rises as firms raise 249 billion naira. Below that, UK students' visa to Nigerians surge 223 in 1 year. And Nestle, 4 others, transport costs hit 43 billion in 6 months. These are stories on the front page of today's the Business Day newspaper. Just before we close on that, 2 more. Nigeria's best performing sectors in Q2. Its details can be found on page 4. And then, of course, worst performing sectors in the second quarter of the year. Of course, it's part of the story talking about the economic growth, which is the main lead of today's the Business Day newspaper.
All right. All right. So with that, let's take perspectives on some of the stories on the front pages. Like we told you, we have Mukhtar Suleiman, a public affairs commentator, in the studio with us to give perspectives to some of the stories. Thank you so much for joining us on Daybreak this morning.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Well, beginning with the lead story on the day on the Daily Trust newspaper, quite an insightful story. Anyways, it's an analysis and giving you a sense of what's really going on with the health sector in Nigeria. And from what we are seeing, the story says we have the doctor-patient ratio in Nigeria is now 1 to 5,000 people. That's against the 1 to 600 that the WHO has has, I would say, set a standard for countries. What's the meaning of this really? Because it's unbelievable.
I think it still boils down to what's the open secret we all know in the country, which is that people are actively looking for greener pastures where they can actually get sustainable income to actually sustain their standard of living, especially in this global economic turmoil that the world is actually suffering. I have a cousin who is a doctor who is set to about to leave the country as well. It seems like Nigeria is not doing as much as it should to value the talent that it has. While it is no secret, while we'll say we cannot deny that the education that we've received is somewhat affordable for us to be able to go abroad and go and practice actively, but you still also have to ensure that you pay people enough to retain them to stay in their positions. And I think that's one of the places that Nigeria has fallen short of significantly across almost every sector. Remote work is now becoming a thing even these days, especially in creative sectors. I have a friend of mine who works for certain companies in the US, and he's being paid annually in hundreds of thousands of dollars. And you get to see that people who don't want to leave, don't want to work for Nigeria. They want to work remotely for a company somewhere else that can pay them in that dollars that they can actually use to maintain certain standards of living. And because I've said this before, it is one thing when the country is suffering and you could see that, the government is trying really hard to salvage the situation. But it's another thing when you see that the country is suffering and the people are living, the government is living la vida loca. Like they're just spending as much as they can. You see them in flashy cars, flashy houses. And that doesn't bode well, honestly, especially for the labor market.
Well, one issue is that a lot of people also criticize the persons leaving, especially medical doctors who are trained in public universities, that it is immoral or perhaps unpatriotic that you leave the country despite the health need of the people, despite the money spent on training, and then go to another place for personal prosperity. How do you see that?
The concept of morality is a very gray area. And yes, patriotism matters, but patriotism is two ways, both ways. I should be patriotic to the country should also be patriotic to me as a citizen. Because now, what they feel is, I have spent these whole years in school, suffered as much as I can. Like I said from the beginning, it's a given. The education system is affordable for them to be able to go on at that standard, to still be able to practice at a global level. I agree fully 100% with that. But beyond that idea of what patriotism means, the question is, what's the country going to give back to me? I know doctors that are suffering just to feed on a daily basis. For those of them who manage to actually stay in private practice, they cannot advance to a better level because of the workload that exists in the private practice. And for them to actually even move abroad, it's not that cheap. It's not as easy as most people think.
Exactly, which is one of the issues that I want to raise as well.
I would remember that my cousin was telling me about how much the exams he needed to write. There's one they write in Lagos first. There's one they write that's regional for West Africa. There's another one he had to travel to the UK to write one and then come back. It's not as cheap as we think it is. It's actually very, very, very expensive. And all of it is so that they can also get a better life for themselves. And that is very paramount, because if the country wants to keep them, then the country should do more. Because now, invariably, what we are saying is, take for instance, you work in a company and you know your worth as a person. You see your colleagues in other organizations that are being paid very well for your worth. And then there's an opening for you to move and get a better offer. And you say, just because the company is somewhat personal, or I have to be loyal, I'm not going to.
No, but you know, Mukhtar, this is beyond that. This is not a company, this is a country.
I agree.
A country above, where a lot of these doctors were given nearly free education.
I agree.
So that's the question. Like, if what does it cost you if you are, for example, going to do, it's different if somebody goes to pay, through their nurses in maybe UK or any other place, and, that is self-sponsorship. But a lot of the people, especially who attended public universities in Nigeria, nearly, qualify as medical doctors, using just a pittance, because we don't pay tuition fee. Compared to other countries, our education is heavily subsidized. That's the issue. It's not about, I don't think the example of a company and, private entities and an employer really fits this scenario.
I do agree with you. Like I said earlier, again, I'm just going to reiterate that. It is nearly cheap, the education that we got. And it sounds unfair, but at the very least, you see that even the standard of the hospitals are not at par. They are really terrible. You see that the remittances are poor. We're just seeing a report about pension just before the program started. You work the entirety of your life only for your pension. The pension is a contributory effort between you and your employer, where I put in some percentages of my salary, you help me augment that, and at the end of the day, I don't even get it when I'm done. So instead of stealing and all of that, some people actually find alternative routes that can actually give them a better life, even for now and for their children as well. But sorry, one more thing. I agree that it is not fair. But let me give you an example. A friend of ours who practices in the UK came around the other time and was telling us about a device that if you put it on someone's hand, you can just see a vein and just put in the needle. So my cousin was telling me a story about one of his colleagues as well, who is now practicing in the UK, that the very first time he went to the UK, he was going to put in an IV for someone, and then he was tying the person's hand. They had to call him, they had to do their medical association meeting. They thought he was mad for him to have done that. I agree that, but the country needs to do its own part to ensure that, because the UK citizens, most of them are not moving. Why? The country is doing its own part to keep them.
But again,
so I think we need to do our own part.
And another angle to this, is it really true that, going out there is the way forward, really? Because if you look at it, the countries that we are talking about are also having they are dealing with their own fair share of the inflation and all the other economic problems that we are talking about. So it's more like the case of the higher the pay, the more the problems. The more they pay, the more the bills. Because out there, you pay much more, than you are likely to pay here in terms of bills now.
Let me give you an example of how it works. they say, let's take for instance now, you get a job that pays you $200,000 annually, and this is not full for medical doctor standard. So I get a job that pays me 200K in dollars annually, and 40% of that amount is for tax. So I get to keep only 60% for myself. Out of that 40% that is for tax, you know that the system is going to work for you. Your tax that you've paid is actually going to work for you. There's a good transport network, so I don't get to spend a lot of money to commute. There's healthcare and a host of other packages. The 60% I'm going to keep is still like 500% more than what I will earn in Nigeria. So that's often the calculation. And if you look at it, very few Nigerians actually go abroad legally and not make it. Because one, we're very smart, we're very hardworking, we're very fast. I've met somebody from the US who said he doesn't like Nigerians because we're unnecessarily fast for his liking.
Okay, so how can Nigeria make the most of this unfortunate situation? Yes, it's an unfortunate one, but in terms of diaspora remittance, say for instance, is there a chance that we could actually turn this to work in our favor?
I hope. Because then again, it comes back to what we've actually been saying since the beginning of the year. 2023 is going to be a make or mar situation for us. I'm hoping that whatsoever it is that we get back into the system to become not just even the president, even across board, both the Senate and all of it, can actually sit down together and think of creative and innovative ways to ensure that the economy is favorable for every single person, honestly.
All right, then. Let's take a look at
quite interesting.
other stories.
Yeah. So, I don't know, but there is a story on the front page of Daily Trust regarding DPO that was abducted in Kaduna on his way to report to duty. Yeah. And he's been in detention for quite a number of days. But of course, recently, I've seen another story of another DPO in Zamfara State who was abducted, and I think he spent like 5 days in captivity, but later released. What does this tell us? What do you think of when you think of senior security personnel being abducted like almost everyone else?
It's sad, really. It's painfully sad because if our security infrastructure cannot protect itself from the insecurity itself, then it speaks terribly of the situation that we as ordinary citizens are in. We usually say that we sleep well, we hope to sleep well at night because of the good work our security personnel are putting in to ensure that we have a safe society. But that has not been the case recently. I heard about the story of the DPO earlier, the one that was shot, the aide was killed in Kaduna and then he was taken. That's very, very sad and very, very quite painful. And you would think that, this would stir up action from the security officers and there will be political capital, they'll be able to put pressure on the politicians to ensure that there's political capital to get things done. But it seems as if there's this Coca-Cola effect to these things. When it happens the first time, if you pick up a bottle of Coke and then you shake it and then you open it, there's this surge of gas that comes out. So everybody, in that instant when the thing first of all happens, everybody's then it just settles back into the same situation all over again. And it's annoying that this is becoming normal. It's so normal now that sometimes even most of the kidnappings that happened recently along the Kaduna-Abuja Express Road is not even being reported anymore. It's not like it's no longer newsworthy, and that's really, really sad. This should not be a normal thing, and I'm hoping that eventually we can actually see how we can make things better.
All right. So there's also another story here on the News Direct. The lead story says stakeholders kick over sustenance of electricity supply to Togo, Niger, and Benin. That's we are talking about 5.8 billion naira electricity debt. Yet, we've continued to supply electricity to these countries.
I understand the whole idea of diplomacy, where you give lesser, because US does it for us and a host of other countries, so it's only normal if we do it for other countries. But you know this thing they say, don't remove the stick from someone's eye unless you've removed the log in yours. For us, I don't know, I don't understand the logic. But then again, somebody else will argue, a US citizen, I have a few of my friends who are US citizens that will also argue that there are poor people in US, and yet USAID is pumping money to fight poverty in Africa. There are poor people there are homeless people in the US, and yet Bill and Melinda Gates is pumping money to fight housing in Africa. So it's weird, the whole concept of foreign policy. You know, it's really, really weird. It's what, you know, we can all just shout and say, this is wrong, but then there are other countries that are doing the same thing.
A lot of people have argued that perhaps this Nigerian status of giant of Africa and then the whole foreign policy of Nigeria perhaps should be reviewed when it comes to, you know, aiding other African countries and then taking that big brother posture on all of that. If
we want to do, I don't know. It's the foreign policy that we actually have has in some ways assisted Nigeria in terms of, like, you go to the African Union, for instance. Most of the staff that are there are Nigerians. Nigerians control most of what happens at the African Union. You go to some other ECOWAS. Nigeria has a lot of power, and because of that, we have some leeway as citizens, even if we're not using them properly these days. It's something, I agree, it should be reviewed, but then again, there is a very gray area between not doing it and then salvaging what is left in your country. It's just a really, really mixed, mashed up. I'm not really a foreign policy person, but it doesn't make sense and it makes sense at the same time. That's what I can say. That's the best I can say. And there's another story there at News Direct again that actually caught my attention, which is the Nigerian carrier not being able, after 14.6 billion has been approved.
National carrier operation not
You're
feasible.
saying that the national carrier is not feasible. I remember last year, Hadi Sirika came to the news. He was so sure that by April this year, it was going to take off and all of that. How much was it that they spent on logo again? It was a lot of money.
Yeah, it was a lot of
It was a
money.
lot of money. And then you come out now and tell us that it is not feasible. This is the same headline, I can guarantee you. I remember it was on the news in 2018.
These are actually stakeholders. That's experts who play in the industry.
Yeah, but you could copy this headline and paste it in 2018, from 2018. The same thing in 2017, the same thing in 2020, and yet monies were being approved continuously until this year for the same thing. It's sickening. Honestly, it's really, really sickening.
All right then. More stories.
Okay, yeah, let's look at the politics. I don't know, what do you make of the posture of the former president, Olusegun Obasanjo? He's been moving from one place, from jumping from political meetings in London to now coming to Mina and saying, oh, I have no candidate. But of course, there were stories a few weeks ago that he was galvanizing support for Peter Obi. And then somehow what happened in London between Obi himself and Wike gave credence to that story. But now he's saying, no, I have no candidate. It's only Nigeria. What do you think?
Politics is a game of prostitution. I think we can all unanimously agree on that. Baba still has a mandate. Like, what I mean is, he can still go to the poll and cast a franchise. So to openly say he doesn't have a candidate is something of taking into cognizance the kind of person that he is, and that his person does not, if he wants to openly support a candidate, it might actually cause a lot of ruckus in the country. So he would not want to do that. But he's obviously going to vote for somebody eventually at the end of the day. We might not know who it is, we might end up knowing who it is, but what he says is just a political statement at the end of the day. He has met with almost all the top running mates. It's normal for him to have said that he's a key stakeholder. He's an elder statesman at this point. So he has to say things like that. It's too early for anybody in his status to start saying, this is who we are voting for, or who I am not voting for, or who I'm supporting. But eventually he's going to have to vote for one person. He can't vote for everybody. And he cannot say he will not vote.
All right. So in the same breath, we're also talking about the return of Shekarau back to the PDP again after leaving the NNPP.
Yeah.
So Atiku is waiting, is in Kano to receive him and his supporters and all that. Goes back to the issue of what you're saying about
politics, is a game of prostitution.
But do we have to be like that? Do things have to be this way?
Last week when we had this conversation, I said, Ganduje just somewhere sipping coffee. As of this morning, early in the morning, I woke up early in the morning, I saw the news, and I was like, okay, interesting, the immediate rise and fall of NNPP. But the weird part of it is the reason behind it. He felt his people were not given key tickets, which I don't think the party leadership of NNPP, in hindsight, did not try to, politics is a give and take thing. That's how it works. You have to give me something, and I give you back, and we keep going back and forth, exchanging favors. So he didn't feel like his interests were properly catered for by NNPP, and he felt shortchanged. And from what I heard, he had raised this concern severally, even before it became public, and nothing was done about it. He's a key player in the game, so he understands political statements. He understands when someone is just trying to lead him on. So he got angry.
Yeah, there are arguments about his party. I mean, his supporters, did not secure the tickets of the party.
Yes, that was primarily
the primaries and everything. And then also the counter argument to that is that they joined the party late, which is why things turn out to be against them and all that, and denials here and there.
Like
he is a very key person that the NNPP needed. So if it meant ensuring that his interest was properly covered, just for the longevity of what they wanted, the vision of the party, make sure it's a tad happy. Meet him halfway. Meet him somewhere. If that was done, I feel like, okay, fine. They can say, okay, going forward, we'll see how much more we can do, because it's still a new party. They've not won any elections yet. So, but he didn't feel as if his interest was in any way even the top priority in any way for the party, and that's why he left.
So maybe let's close still on politics, on this note of the PDP now. The issue of
Wike.
It appears that this difference, as they say, is irreconcilable, is somehow appearing like that. After the meeting with Atiku, news filtered in that he's still insisting on removal of Ayu. And of course, as we've seen in the front page of many papers today, including Punch and The Nation, is like a hard nut to crack. Do you see the PDP cracking this nut and reuniting Wike with Atiku?
On one hand, the way I see it, in a personal opinion, Atiku is trying not to dance too much to Wike's tone, so it doesn't look like Wike has control over him. On the other hand, Wike doesn't want to budge, because if you've dragged up a crisis to this level, it's either you see it through, or you fall out and then you become useless. So that's where it's a power struggle at this point now, and there's a lot of ego around it. Wike feels strongly betrayed by Ayu, and I don't know what the end goal is, but he wants to see to it that, I think he's trying to prove to Ayu that he has as much power as he
Maybe
claims.
to extract his pound of flesh.
Yes, he wants that. He wants to ensure that he exercises that power that he has claimed that he has. And unless that is done, he's saying that that's the one thing he has held on to ever since. I think he has let go of some of his other demands, but that the party chairman must go. That one is not ready. It's not ready to budge.
All right. Well, thank you so much. At this point, we would end the segment. We appreciate you for coming and sharing your perspectives with us.
Thank you so much for having me, as always.
Yes, thank you.